Good evening, peasants, and welcome back inside the Palace Castle for yet another episode of Historia Mystoria. I am Professor Sponseller, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join us once again here this evening. Tonight, we're going to finish up our look at the colonies, and the first people of the colonies, let's put it that way. And we're going to be taking a look at the Puritans. And as you can guess, the Puritans looking to reform, just like the Separatists were trying to reform, as well as the Quakers were trying to reform. And so we're going to take a look at these people and compare and contrast them to maybe the Quakers as well as the Separatists. And so I hope that you really learned something out of this lesson. As you can see, we're here in the burrows tonight to tell you this story and to tell you this lesson. So go grab you a nice drink and maybe a glass of milk or some Oreo cookies if we get started here on this last episode of the colonial people here on Historia Mystoria. Welcome inside, guys. We're going to go ahead and get this lesson started, and this is our last lesson on the colonial peoples of the New World, and we're going to take a look at the Puritans. Yes, the Puritans, one of the groups that gets talked about the most probably out of all of the early colonial people who came to the New World, especially from England. We're going to examine their settlement here in the New World. We're going to examine their life and compare it to maybe the Separatists, compare it to the way the Quakers did their life. But I want you to look at this question, and I want you to come to class with this question in mind. If we're going to take a look at it in depth, more in class in our activities, but it says, which of the following freedoms would you give up if you had to choose one, and then explain why. So I want you to decide which of these would you be willing to set off to the side if you had to, and then give me the reasons why you would choose this one. We'll go over more of that in class tomorrow. Now, as we get started into the lesson here today, I want to start off with a timeline. Of course, you talked a lot about the Roman Catholic Church back in your world history class as a religion, and that's what I want to take a look at here. We're going to then look at the Protestants. We've already taken a look at some of the Protestantism, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, Lutherans, all of these denominations that have kind of spurred off of the Protestant Church, and then the Church of England. We're going to focus on that one that says Church of England. We've already kind of talked about one group of people who were going to reform the church, and that was the Separatists. Those were the Pilgrims that we talked about, those who landed in what we know as Massachusetts today and then kind of created a separate religion per se off of the Church of England. We're going to take a look at the other side of that today now and talk about the Puritans, the group of people who wanted to purify the church. They wanted to reform in a way to make it more pure, to make it more, unique, and kind of get away from some of the basics that the Church of England were doing. And so as you take a look at the spider chart, that's kind of the way it went in regards to the Roman Catholic Church, to Protestantism, to the Church of England. So we're going to be taking a look at these English Protestants who are going to simplify the church. Yes, make it more simple. All right, try to get rid of all of the elegance and all of the, big hoopla that goes on in the Church of England per se, kind of like the Roman Catholic Church. And if we mentioned before how the Quakers were persecuted, England began persecuting everyone who was refusing to agree with the Church of England. So if you were someone who was just an inkling off of what the Church of England wanted or expected, if you just disagreed even with a minute thing, they were going to persecute you. The Puritans, the Separatists, the Catholics, anyone who didn't agree with the Church of England would be persecuted. Now, we talked a little bit about persecution in the lesson on the Quakers, but most of the time people get this vocabulary word confused. Persecuted does not mean to kill, okay? That's execution. That's a completely different word, okay? So don't get that confused. One of the biggest things that my high school kids always get confused is the word persecution. That means to mistreat. I love two-word definitions. You're going to see these all year long on Historia Mystoria, and you're going to hear me talk about them in class. But I love two-word definitions. Be as simple as possible. To persecute means to mistreat. Simply all you need to know. And so any type of mistreatment means that you'd be persecuted. Well, that's the way that these Puritans were feeling. And on the map behind me here, you see where the Puritans kind of congregated to. There were a mass all right, exodus of these people coming from England here to the New World. Some going to what we know as Maine today, or what was Massachusetts at that time. You see in the purple, that's the early population centers. You can see that they really came into places in eastern Massachusetts, all right, like places like Plymouth and Salem, Marblehead and Concord and Boston. Places on the eastern side of Rhode Island, like Providence, for example, in southern Connecticut, like New Haven, and even on the eastern side of what we know as New York City and Long Island today. Now, we're going to talk more about New York and New York City and what it was before at a later time in our advanced colony mission. But understand with this map, you can see where the Puritans have kind of migrated to. Now, English dissenters began to see America as a place where they could worship freely. That was the reason for this mass exodus. We already saw that the Pilgrims came here, the Quakers. We've already saw these different groups. And so all these English dissenters, and what is a dissenter, you ask? It means, here we go again, two-word definition, to disagree. Anybody who was disagreeing with the Church of England began to really migrate here to the New World, claiming they could worship freely or start their own religion per se. As we mentioned before, they wanted to reform the church just like the Separatists did and like the Quakers wanted to do. Reform, yet another two-word definition. It means to change. Very simple, obviously, reform, change. And an example of this, how did they want to reform the church per se? Well, they wanted to have a simpler form of worship, not make it so, bizarre and not so full of things. Keep it simple and to the point. They wanted to do away with Catholic traditions such as organ music and special clothing for priests. Again, very simplistic way to worship. Well, the leader of this movement was a guy by the name of John Winthrop, and he's going to lead the Puritans and kind of get them all to where they're all on the same page and agreeing and reforming it to where everyone could have a part in it, so that we didn't have one sect of people doing this and one sect of people doing that. We wanted everyone to be on the same page. In 1629, the Puritans were then granted a charter to form what was known as the Massachusetts Bay Company, which would then compete with the Virginia Company for land more in the north. We know that Virginia, as you can see down here on the map, we kind of looked at what that area consisted of. But now we've got the Massachusetts Bay. That was everything kind of north and northeast of the Hudson River, New Amsterdam, New Sweden, New Netherlands. You actually look at these words. We're going to talk about this in class in one of your lessons in class, or your activities in class, about all these names and how they got named that. We'll come back to that at a later time. Well, just as the Quakers and just as the Pilgrims, what were the relationships like with the Native Americans? Well, fighting continued to increase because these white folks just started to come in and pretty much take the Native American land. And of course, sometimes the Indians would put up a fight. They said they weren't going to go anywhere. And of course, the white men had better weapons, had better, skills to do the things that they needed to do to get rid of the Native Americans and eventually push them farther and farther to the west. If we move forward now, let's take a look at what were the lifestyle, what were the values of the Puritans like? Because were they like the Quakers? Did they have specific laws? Did they have specific things they believed in? Well, yes, they did, but they were a completely different group of people than the Quakers. They believed in hard work. They believed that the harder you work, the better things would be for you and your family and for the people in a colony as a whole. And so they worked very hard at everything that they did, farming, fishing, hunting, in order to become the most successful colony that they possibly could be. And then your individual values as a family. They believed that religion and education were extremely important. They believed that kids should be learning not just religion, but also educational values. They should be learning about what they should do and what they shouldn't do in regards to their religion. So things like dancing and games were disapproved of and were actually illegal, as were most things, on the Sabbath. Now, what's interesting here about the Puritans and the Puritan way of life, remember when we go back to the Quaker lesson here on Historia Mystorica, we talked about how they wanted to be that colony that everybody looked towards, that they were going to be the marquee one that everyone looked up to. Well, so too do the Puritans. They wanted Massachusetts to be what was called, quote unquote, the city on the hill, someone that everyone could look up to, that this was the way that your colony should be established, that you should look to us to make, to build what your society should be. And Of course, when we have that, you've got those who were maybe trying to mess that up. And there were the stories of witches and witchcraft. And when things weren't going well in the Puritan religion or in the Puritan colonies, then these witches were being blamed. They were becoming the scapegoats for their problem. Of course, a scapegoat, don't know what the definition of that is. Of course, it's someone who takes the blame for something that they really didn't have any part of. But some of the things that these witches were blamed for was the stress on the colony, certain diseases like smallpox, the attacks by the Native Americans per se, belief in the devil. So all these things came out there. And in one of your final lessons in this mission, you're going to be talking about witchcraft and doing a little bit of a case study on exactly what was happening here in the northeastern parts of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Bay Company. Again, the scapegoat, one that believes the blame, receives the blame for the others. Okay, guys, that will wrap up this edition of Historia Mystoria and our taking a look at the Puritans and the Puritan way of life. I really hope that you have learned something over this mission about all the different colonial people who first set foot here in the New World and who we can look to and how do we get some of the beliefs and values that we have in our country today. They had to start from somewhere, and of course it comes from all these people that we've taken a look at here over the past week or 2 weeks or so in your third mission. So that'll again wrap it up. I'm Professor Sponseller, and until you have to get ready for the next mission, for everybody here at the Palace Castle, I bid you good night. And remember, if you're not learning, you're not earning. Good night.